Hello, this is Danny from CG Dreams, and in this video I'm going to be talking about skin within Cinema 4D using Vray. Now the Vray version that I'm using is in beta at the moment and it's version 3.4. I can't give you the specific number, the beta version, but that's really irrelevant because by the time you're watching this you should be able to have access to the latest beta just as I've got right now. So the three skins that we're going to be looking at, all skin surfaces, is the Vray Fast SSS2. Then we've got the Vray skin material, and then we've got the new Vray AL surface material. And I'm going to show you the pros and cons of each of these and how to set them up, or how I've set them up to get the best results that I've got so far. So the model that I'm going to be demonstrating this on is Mickey 2, and it's an asset that I purchased many years ago for Poser. The three skin materials that we're going to be looking at are from the left here, the AL Service, which is very new. The next one on is the Fast SS2, which has been used for quite some years now within Vray. And then we've got the new Vray skin material, okay, the newest one being the AL Service. So first of all, let's start with the most technical and the hardest one. The hardest one by far to set up is the skin material, and it's hard because it's given you lots of options. And with more option comes more problems because you've got more of a balancing act to get right. The first issue that I come across when I started to use the skin material was I couldn't get the colour of the diffuse makeup to come through, and this was quite tricky. There were some workarounds that I had to go around to getting that done, but it wasn't very pretty. It wasn't a very nice way of having to work. So I'm not trying to put you off using the skin material, but it took me quite a few hours to set something up which I was reasonably happy with. So I'm just going to go through some of the settings that are really important. The first thing is the scale. If you're working in real world scale, i.e. this Mickey is probably about 5'3", 5'4", it will have to be exactly the same within the application in use, Cinema 4D. In this particular case you can leave the scale to 1. The max SS amount is normally left to 1, but what we can do is we can turn off the subsurface scattering quickly just by putting this to 0. It's a quick way of turning it off. The max reflections again is set to 1 normally, and it's a good way of you just completely turning off all the reflections that come with the skin material. Now there are some limitations with the skin material, and that is that when you apply the reflections, you've got the primary and the secondary reflections, you're limited to using just the reflections within this material. What you can't do is you can't use a say an advanced material and use the reflections from that and use a blend material to blend it. It just won't work. I've tried it. So let's start from the top. We've looked at these basic settings up here, and they're generally left to 1, but when you're setting up your reflections, then that's handy for when you want to sort of turn off your subsurface scattering amount, etc., so that you're just working with that. So that's quite a nice way of working. The makeup, if I was just to locate this image, okay, the makeup, as you can see there, this is what I did, is I basically masked out in Photoshop the areas that I wanted to come through as makeup. So basically when it's going to be pulling through the colour, it's only going to be pulling through what I've shown here, as you can see there. Nothing fancy in this at all really, it's just the fact that I've used it in the diffuse channel so that it aids in bringing through the colour a little bit more, the diffuse for the colour. The next thing is the diffuser mount. The more diffuser mount that you apply, the less subsurface scattering effect that you're going to see. in essence, it basically is going to give you a matte finish when it comes to subsurface scattering and the color that you've used. So the more I apply this, the more it's going to apply that. It's very subtle in this setup, but that's the way that the skin material works. Very subtle settings can either make it or break it. The next one down from this is the colours for the different layers of subsurface scattering. So you've got the dermis, epidermis and the subdermis. Generally, the colours that they set these up are kind of working quite nice. So what I tend to do is I tend to sample the colours, and then I will try to match the colours with the map. Now, if the map in use doesn't quite work very well, then what you can do is you can apply, let's see if I can do it here. You go to a Vray and you go to a power shader, and by applying a power shader, what it does is it will allow you to have these adjustments for it. So you can see here that I've adjusted the exposure, the brightness, the gain, saturation, etc. But what you can also do is if you go to the output, you can actually add a tint of color with this. So say for instance, if I do this, you can see here it's putting a tint of color over the top. So this is a nice way to try to find your settings so they match quite well. As far as the amounts go, you can see here I've had to tweak them, and I tried all different ways to work. I tried working from the bottom up and from the top down, that being from the lowest level, the deeper scattering, to the top. What I found is it is better to work from the bottom upwards, so that you can get your primary scattering and back scattering done. Now, the back scattering and front scattering for the skin material, there is no adjustment for this. There is for the SSS2 material using the phase, but there's not for this. So it's something that you've got to find a balance with. Now, this brings me on to the subject of this now, which I really must bring out. I'm just going to locate this image so you can see this. What you can see that I've had to do with this is I've had to apply a tint of slight pinky darky reddy colour to the nose and to the ears. And the reason why I've had to do this is because it's a trade-off when it comes to the skin material. And what do I mean by this? Well, the trade-off is if you want a nice back scattering to the ear, you have to have the red within the map. But if you have the red within the map over the whole entire map, you'll find that you'll get too much red pushing through to the other skin tones or the other layers. It's very difficult to balance. So as you can see with this, what I've had to do is I've had to make sure that there's some deeper colours on there, and they're only going to push through the deeper deep scatter, I believe it's called, deep scatter, these colours for back scattering, and also for the nose as well in this particular case that I wanted. So this I found was the best way for me to be able to get the back scattering red on the ears without having the red over the whole entire lot of the face, because it will push through and it will destroy the overall colours, and that wasn't very nice at all. It wasn't very nice. So I'm going to go to the forum now where I've posted these images up and just show you. So what we're looking at the moment is this skin shader here. You see the skin shader, no post. It means I've done nothing to do any correction at all. Now this post version here was when I took the image into Photoshop and I'd done some color adjustment. Now I had to do that to get this skin tone back, the more realistic skin tone. Originally this is what it came through like. This is when I had the deep scattering map all red, or all a dark colour. It just basically destroyed the overall tint that I wanted, and this is why I had to go in there and create this map so that it didn't do that. And in fact, if I go and move to another image here, this is the result. So you can see here we've got the backscattering on the back of the ear. We've got a little bit of tint on the nose here. That's just a personal preference that I wanted. But overall, we've got a pinky kind of light coloured skin, which resembles more closer to the original map. And this was because I'd done this with a map. Now, as you can see, the map, you can see it looks quite pinky, and this is because I went to the output and the power shader, and you can see I added an overall pink tone. And it enables me to control how much tone I want over this, and this is how I've got this effect. When I'm setting things up, what I tend to do is I tend to turn all of the rest of them off. So at the very beginning stages, I will have just this map. I will have no controlling map for the amount, just the map for the color, and the rest of these I'll turn off. So for instance, I wouldn't touch the radius, I would just touch the amount for each of the other subsurface scattering layers, so that I'm just dealing with one at a time. Now, if I just go down there and just close these a minute so they're just not in our visual way. You can see I've set the deep amount to 1 as the maximum amount of level. Okay, so it's pushing through all the way. Initially, when I set up the radius, what was happening with the radius was it was pushing too much forward. It wasn't pushing enough through, and in the end, I had to revert to actually making a map. And as I mentioned, the more maps you make, the more complicated things get, because it's easier to use a slider to adjust things than it is to keep on going back and changing the map. And you can see here that this map shows in white where I really wanted the subsurface scattering to have the maximum radius, the ears and the nose, and then you can see here around the eyes and the inner eyes I had to tone it down. This is so that when the subsurface scattering is applied, you can see here we've got a dark grey. It's going to apply less to the inner part of the eye and the inner part of the mouth, because this is where bleeding occurs, and this is where basically these areas glow up, and it's hard to not use a map like this, to be quite honest with you. It will bleed in these thinner areas, and there's nothing you can do about that other than apply a map. And you can see here that I wanted more radius. This is purely for the radius depth, okay, on the nose and the ears. Nose not so much, a little bit more, but you can see here how I've had to do this with this map. It is a trial and error, it really is, and that's what you have to do if you want to get rid of the bleeding. So that was at that stage. Now, while you're setting this up, it's paramount that you've got your light set up as well. So you would have to have a rim light, which is typically going to be behind the head, and then you'd have a key light, which is normally either facing the whole face, which you don't really want, or off to the left or right side. And in this particular case, I would have it off to one side. So let's just have a look at this. We've got the rim light, and then up here we've got our key light. Okay. And we just look at our key light, and it's an area light. Well, it doesn't look much like it is. It is actually an area light. Okay, maybe because I've applied, yeah, it's a sphere type area light. That's why it's looking like that. So that kind of lets you into what the lighting is, the lighting setting up is. Now, when I'm setting up the subsurface scattering for the deep scatter, what I would do is I would switch off the key light, and I would just work with the rim light. So it's behind, so I'm getting the right amount of depth coming through the back of the ears, so we can see this. You will have to tweak things. Once you've dealt with the back scattering, then you would turn on the key light, and see if you can get a nice scattering on the front of the nose. And it's the balancing act again, like I said. So once you've done that, then you want to start to dial in and set up the next layer above that. And you can see here we've got the medium scattering, and it's kind of more of a yellow kind of tingy color to it. And again, you want to load it into the power shader. So you go to the Vray and go to the power shaders, and then within there is where you want to load your map, and it will be here in your basic tab. You load your map into here, and this is where you've got control. You can see here you can change the exposure and all of these settings, and of course within the output you can add a bit of tint to it. So that's exactly what I did there. Exactly the same thing as before. I had the same problem again, where I felt that there's no way I could control how the map was working as far as the shallow amount. So yeah, very difficult, very difficult to set up here. So this depth, you could say, this depth map, it's not the simple case of just dialing it up and down. It just won't do it. It will start to overtake the colors that are in there. In other words, if you get this color coming through really nicely, what it would tend to do is it would take it away from the back scattering of the ears, and it's a real pain. So in this map I had to give it a 50% grey, and then I had to paint out the areas where I didn't want there to be this subsurface scattering dominating or coming through. Once I had that set up, then it was onto the next layer. So we've got the deep one, we've got the mid, and then finally we got the top layer. The top layer is going to give you really this shallow scattering one. It's going to give you your overall skin tone, you could say. And you can see here that the amount that I've got set in here, when I wasn't using the map, was quite high. I had to have it much higher than the shallow radius. See there, because the other colors would just dominate it. It would just come through way too much. So the shallow amount was quite high. The medium amount was lower. You can see here we got 0.68, 66, but eventually I controlled them all with the maps, because there's no way that a dial could just justify it and do an okay job on it, and that was the only way I was able to get this image that you see here, where I've got a bit more balance there. But it took a long time to get right, as far as I got it anyway. So once you've set all of these up, and let's just close these down so that we can just concentrate on one area at a time. Once you set all of these up, you may want to at some point go in there and set up your reflections. So we've got the primary and secondary. The reflections are normally a blue kind of tint. This is the reflection map that I painted. And what I did was I used the I think it was a color map that I used. It had a lot of registration of detail in it, and I used a high pass filter, and then I painted on another layer here so that I had a nice combination of detail there. That was the primary. Be careful what you do with the glossiness when you're not using a map, because this is applied to the glossiness. The glossiness I found best to be around about sort of 50% if you want an overall glossiness there. When it comes to the secondary reflection, it's going to be a bit more tighter. So what about the bump and displacement? Well, the bump map has to be loaded into here, and it's a normal map in this particular case, tangent space. And then we have to use a displacement material which is entirely separate, and it applies for all of these. So that's what I'm going to go to next, show you the displacement material, and then I'm going to look at the other skin shaders or materials. If you're using a displacement map, or you're going to need to use one, you will go to the create and we go to the Vray bridge, and then we will select our displacement material. The displacement material, again, it's best to use either the power shader or the advanced bitmap. The advanced bitmap is the one that I would normally go with. Once you click onto here, there's a few things that you need to set up, especially when you're working with a 32-bit displacement map. So just briefly here, we load the file into here. We want to make sure that the blur is set to 0. Gamma needs to be to linear. Allow negative colors. And I don't believe there's anything else in here that we need to concern ourselves with. That's pretty much it. And then we come out of here. There's a couple of settings that I would use, and I would use the 3D mapping. There's another video that I've done on 32-bit displacement maps with ZBrush that you should watch, because it tells you how to get it set up correctly. But I prefer to not use the global parameters found in the render settings for displacement. So we've got somewhere in here something, it might be in the expert setting. There it is. So these global settings are set here, the amount, the edge length, which I tend to have quite low for better quality, and the max subdivs. I tend not to use this. I tend to set it up per object. So what you do is you take the global parameters off. You must have view dependent on, it won't smooth your model. And edge length I normally have to about 1. Subds as to whatever you need, say 7 or 8, depending on your model. And then you go to here, use a subdivision service, and then it will actually smooth your model. If you're not using any displacement maps, then you would have to use a subdivision tag. You can see here, got the subdivision surface object tag that you would apply your object into, so that it smooths things out. And that's really all you need to know about that, really. But what you do is you make sure that when you apply this, is that it applies it behind your skin material. So in this particular case, you can see there's my skin material, and then the displacement map would need to be behind it. When you're setting up your displacement map, make sure that it's in front of the skin material while you're setting it up, so it allows you just to view the displacement map by itself. It means that it's going to render faster. It's a way that I like to work with that. That's the way you set that up. Now that I've kind of gone through this, let's have a look at the other skin materials. The next one is the Fast SSS2. This one has been in there for quite a long time, and the Fast SSS2 I've found to give me quite nice results for such little effort. And if we just look at this, this is the SSS2. You can see here we've got the color information coming through very, very well. See there, we've got the backscattering of the ready tint coming through the ears very, very well also. So overall, it's very, very good to use this. I've known many artists to use the SSS2 for many years, because that's all that was available in Vray for some time, and it's really hard to fault it, other than the fact that you do lose a bit of freedom what you've got within the skin material, which is why the skin material, I guess, was made. If we look at the SSS2, things become much more simple by a long shot compared with the skin material. So the first thing is the scale. Like before, the scale according to your model. If it's real world scale, have it at 1. If you want to apply overall more subsurface scattering effect, you can actually change your scale, and that will apply overall more globally. As far as the settings go, I have a multiple scattering set to ray trace, so it doesn't pre-render the maps, which is ideal. The pre-pass is the quality, and I have this set to 1. I think by default it's set to -1. I set it to 1, and that's the kind of ideal between speed of rendering and quality. Moving down to the overall color, this is basically the main color which drives the image, where your skin layer is. You don't really have to do a lot for this. You just simply load in your main color in, your color map, your diffuse color, and that's all there is to it. And this is the overall color. The diffuse color, don't really need it. If you wanted to use a diffuse color, you can you can just copy this into there, and the more diffuse you use, the less subsurface scattering effect that you're going to get, and it will bring through more of the natural colors that was within the map. So it's a way of kind of balancing things a bit for you. The next layer is more of a yellow kind of tint to it, and this would be equivalent to your mid scattering. And again, you can apply a power shader, which is what I've done in here, and in the power shader you can apply a little bit of tint of another color to help give you a different color tone coming through, and that's exactly what I've done for that. You can just see there what it's come out like. What you'll notice here is you don't have the amount on these subsurface scattering layers, which is the subsurface color and the subsurface scatter color. Okay, all you have is one setting for how deep it's going to penetrate, which is the scatter radius in centimeters. Again, with the lighting set up, turn off your key light and then start to adjust this until you start to see the glow on the back of the ears, and then you can turn your key light back on. Now with the phase function, which I wish they had put into the skin shader, this basically determines whether you're going to get more front scattering, which is lower setting, as opposed to high scattering, and I found around about 75, 76 gives me the ideal. As far as the specular goes, this is a specular and not reflection, so if you don't like what's in here, most people I don't think do like to use this, what you can do is you can set up a blend material, and then it will basically override what's going on in here. So that's one thing you can do. You just turn the specular amount down, you go to create, and we create a blend material. There it is. And in the blend material we would drag and drop our fast SS2 into the base layer, and then we would create an advanced material, and in the advanced material all we want is our specular. We don't want no diffuse, we just want specular, and we can set up the specular, and we've got much more control over this. When we set this up, what happens is when you apply this, let's just bring up our blend material, you apply it there, turn it on, and then what you'll see, you see the top left there, you can see the specular coming through on top. Okay, now if you was to just expand this, you can see you can expand this down like that. The material weight is how we apply less of the layers to it, and if I remember rightly, it wasn't mixed strength, it was something else in there. What I tend to do is I tend to go to the actual layer itself and adjust all my specularity. Let's just bring this back into here. So you would have that I'll just show you in fact what I do as a workflow, as I will just say click on this, I would lock it to the right hand side, and then I would open this here so you can see both, so that I could be working on my specular while I can see a little preview up here. Now if you looking at this preview at the moment here, if you right click, you should have these installed, and you've got these different Vray previews, and this is going to give you a little bit more better idea of what's really going on. I'll just load one of these up, and it will just give you a better idea of how the specular is affecting the surface there, and you can go in there. That's how you set it up for a more advanced sort of setup there. Overall, however, I've found that it to be quite nice the way that it works. And did I use a blend material for this? I believe I did. As you can see there, here's a blend material that I had set up previously. Let's just load this back up. There we go. So in this particular case, it was with the AL service, exactly the same way as I just mentioned. We set up a specular separate from the main base material, and that's how you can acquire a really nice effect. So for the skin shader and the AL surface shader, that is how I would go about setting up for the specular. I would use a blend material. So I believe at the moment we are using this blend material, this actual blend material itself. So if I just do a preview, this is using the AL service. Although we're not actually talking about the AL surface at the moment, but just to show you here, see the specular, this is set up in the blend map there. So let's just go and grab this skin material there and just drag this to the front, or we could in fact just delete that, couldn't we? But I know what the effect is. This is what the effect is. This is the skin material, and then after I applied the maps the way that you see it, the skin material looks like this, which was quite nice. And I explain in this thread here how I've had to use a specific map to control the backscattering. You can see here on the far left how there was lack of red backscattering on there, and by applying this to the deep scattering, it applied it through. This is for this skin material, by the way. So now I'm going to move on from the subsurface scattering to, I believe I've dealt with everything in there. Let's just have a quick look. Yeah, a couple of more things here. So we've got the specular layer that you can apply if you wish, and then right at the bottom here is where you apply your bump map, just to bring through the extra bit of surface detail there. And that's really it. There's not a lot you have to do with the SSS2. With the AL service, it's even more simpler than even the SSS2, and the results are even better at the trade-off of speed. With the SS2, you simply just load in your power shader or your advanced bitmap. The reason why you have to load that in there is because you have to make sure that when you load in your texture map, you go to color space and you make sure you set it to sRGB if it's coming through very faint. If I was to put this to, say, gamma corrected, you look how pale the skin is. It's not really looking right. So I found that sRGB pushes it through correctly on the surface. That is all I had to do with that. When it comes to the color, this is not even touched. None of this is even touched. And I use the specular. You can use the specular from within here, which is actually reflection. So this is good. It's quite nice. In fact, I can't really fault it. It allows you to apply 2 layers of reflection, which is better than the SSS2 can provide. If you didn't like this, you can put this into a blend material, which you can't do with the skin material. So there we go with that. There's not a lot I can really say about the AL surface shader, other than it's fantastic. It gives a lovely balance. It's almost instant results, and you can load in the additional maps into here if you want, but to be quite honest with you, it works straight out the box. It just works straight off. Just as a demonstration here, this is the AL surface on the left hand side. You can see the overall skin tone is really nice, but it's an unfortunate trade-off that you are going to wait 48 minutes. Or my system, I've got a 5930K Intel chip, which is a 6-core chip. It's overclocked to 4.5 gigahertz. It took me 48 minutes to render this image. The original image, by the way, was actually a bit larger than this, I believe. It was just cropped down. The SSS only took 13 minutes. So there you go, it's the trade-off. You haven't got a lot of tweaking that you can do with the SSS2, but you can certainly change the color of the maps and do some post work to get a closer tone to this. But overall, the AL surface is the king when it comes to skin shaders. I just want to draw your attention as an example here. Look at the eye line right here where the lashes would be. See how the contrast is really nice. There's no bleeding. Also look at between the lips. There's no bleeding there. There's a nice little bit of redness on the inner part of the nose. If you look to the SSS2, especially with GI turned on, look at the bleeding that you've got, the softness that you've got on the lips, the softness that you've got on the eyes. You've lost contrast. And with the SSS2, there's no way that you can actually apply maps into there to control this. So that's the trade-off. For still images, I will by far go with the AL surface and wait a little bit longer. But for quickness, maybe for animations, SSS2 all the way. The skin shader, I'm not overly happy with, purely because of the way that it's working. It really isn't doing it justice for me for the time that it takes to set up the skin shader. Here's a quick render on kind of low settings. This took me 7 minutes and 42 seconds with the AL surface shader. This one with the highest of settings took me 1 hour and 27 minutes of the AL surface. This one with the AL surface again, this was 48 minutes with no GI and medium quick settings. You can see the ears there. There's a little bit of noise. And just for reference, this is just the diffuse, as you can see there. So you can just see the difference between subsurface scattering AL surface and when it's off. I applied the AL surface, took 9 minutes 50 seconds. There was no diffuse colour or anything applied, and it's nice to see just how it's giving you a nice bit of subsurface scattering on the lips and the nose, and the depth that it's got on the ears. This is with no maps applied whatsoever. This is a skull that I sculpted many years ago, and I thought I'd just use this because it's got many thicknesses, and the AL surface, as you can see there, very nice subtle effect of the subsurface scattering. This was with ramped up high settings, unnecessarily high. That took 2 hours 29 minutes. These settings were way lower. There's a bit more noise in there, but only took 15 minutes. This is using the quick settings. I will go into a video at another time about the quick settings because I've done some extensive testing on what really gives the best results for the minimum payback, basically, of time. And here, this render here took 21 minutes. So I hope that demystifies things a bit when it comes to this skin in Vray. And it does take a bit of patience and time to go through things. And you do need to get your lighting right, and you do need to spend some time on some maps when it comes to getting the best results, especially if you're going to be using the skin material.